Hey, it's Claudia, host of the show that you're listening to right now. Just popping in to tell you about our new revamped CityCast Portland membership program. Here's the vision. We're calling it CityCast Portland Neighbors because we learned that people who support CityCast Portland are people who care deeply about the city and want to make it better. And they're the kind of neighbors this city needs. So CityCast Portland Neighbors, it just made sense. We're also adding new benefits on top of ad-free listening and exclusive weekly roundups of local events. Now you also get regular happenings like happy hour hangouts, local volunteering meetups, and other members-only events where we explore and better our city together. Plus, you get to shout out a local business or nonprofit that you love on the show and in the Hey Portland newsletter. For only $10 a month, you can become a CityCast Portland neighbor today. Head over to membership.citycast.fm. That's membership.citycast.fm. Do you have a storefront in your neighborhood that's been empty for months or maybe even years? What about all those luxury apartments no one seems to be occupying? It is an interesting juxtaposition that even with rents rising and overall access to affordable housing being slim, plenty of residential and commercial properties are still sitting vacant. So while Mayor Keith Wilson works hard to provide shelter to our growing unhoused population, the City Council's Homelessness and Housing Committee is looking at ways to fill these vacant properties. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with Councilor Jamie Dunphy, who's leading efforts on one possible solution that we've also kicked around on the show, a vacancy tax. He's going to walk us through how it might work in our city. It's Thursday, May 15th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Before we jump into our conversation with Councilor Dunphy, who is here, by the way, hello.
Hello.
He's being held captive here. I wanted to quickly mention that we just launched our membership campaign yesterday. And one of the benefits of becoming a CityCast Portland neighbor are members-only events. And we're ramping these up. There's going to be happy hours, baseball games, guided tours. We're actually getting excited coming up with these ideas. And after throwing the 503-day block party, which I heard you attended, did you have fun?
I sure did. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to sign up for karaoke, but there was too long of a line.
You don't wait in lines. You're just like, you know what?
I don't wait in lines. That's correct.
I'll sing at home. There's karaoke at home.
There's karaoke at home.
Right. Well, I don't know if you got a chance to talk with people, but I got to hear from so many folks, and it made us realize how important having these shared experiences really is. And it's why we created the CityCast Portland Neighbors program. So I hope you'll join us. Dunphy, of course, like no pressure. I was talking to like the general you, like I wasn't saying, hey, take your wallet out, Councilor Dunphy. But you can lead by example, no pressure. You'll support this show if you join us, our future events and block parties, and help us make sure it just all continues. So go to membership.citycast.fm to join. That's membership.citycast.fm. Like for today's show, a listener, Emily P., requested a deeper dive into vacancy taxes, and we're doing just that. Let's talk vacancy taxes. Thank you, by the way, for holding on.
You've pressured me. I'm going to become a member today. I will.
You are? You're going to become
Absolutely.
A neighbor?
Absolutely. I'll be your neighbor.
Hooray. The pitch worked.
Absolutely. You just have to pressure your interviewer into becoming a member, one at a time.
All right. So, Jamie, you're an advocate for implementing some type of vacancy tax here in Portland. Can you briefly explain what a vacancy tax is?
Yeah. Long and short, a vacancy tax is a fee that you would have to pay the government if you allow your property of any kind to sit empty for an extended period of time. Other jurisdictions have tried this with regard to residential, leaving apartments sitting empty for months at a time. There are some conversations around vacant land and then also commercial and retail space that just, as everyone knows, anyone's driven down any main street in Portland lately, we see a lot of empty storefronts. And some of that is choice. And I'm of the opinion that that choice should be slightly more expensive.
So who would this tax apply to? Because I'm sure that people hear the word tax, me, and then eventually they're just like, I'm sorry, more tax? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, technically, first of all, while colloquially we refer to it as a vacancy tax, in Portland, it would be a vacancy fee. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different models that have worked in different ways across the country. And it sort of depends on what the problem you're trying to solve is. For me, there are really three big problems. First is we're obviously in a housing crisis, and every single housing unit matters. And we know that there are more empty apartments sitting in Portland right now than there are people sleeping on the streets. It's not a one-to-one scenario. I'm not suggesting that we just give every homeless person an apartment on the street, because the reality is that a lot of the vacant apartments are at the luxury end of the spectrum. Really expensive, a lot of those towers in South Waterfront. And in fact, I have been told that there are units in some of those towers in South Waterfront that have truly never been tenanted. The properties actually pencil and they get a tax write-off for keeping those units vacant. So in a housing crisis, let's treat it like a crisis and make sure that every unit gets online. That includes things like Airbnb. There are thousands of Airbnb units in the city, and including thousands of units that are illegal. They're not paying taxes. They don't have a license. And in fact, under city law, you can't have an Airbnb in an apartment. It's just never allowed. So we know that that is a huge area of opportunity that is directly affecting our housing crisis.
Yeah. The speculation that I heard was that one of the reasons why people who own commercial properties, they would rather the storefront stay empty than rent them out, because they don't want to create that low rent. It's still a bank-owned property, and they're basically trying to find people to pay the mortgage. And if they reevaluate their property at a lower value, then the bank is just like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, like, how is that fee going to be passed along if the bank is telling them you can't do that?
Yeah, it's even worse than that. It's not just banks that own these properties. Most of these buildings are not owned free and clear. Almost all of them carry debt. And that debt is usually by either large investment firms, either from overseas or retirement funds or things like that. And they calculate the value of the building overall on a per square foot cost. So just, making up numbers here. If a building is worth $100 million and it works out to be $10 a square foot, if a landlord were to rent out the bottom retail space at $9 a square foot, well, yeah, he just devalued his entire building down to $90 million. And functionally, they are in default on that loan, either to a bank or immediately. Yeah. So additionally, a lot of those mortgages are insured. And so if they have long-term vacancies, they can actually get paid out for that. And a vacancy counts as a potential business loss. And so a lot of landlords and building owners are using that vacant space as a tax write-off to reduce their taxable liabilities on other buildings that they own. So there's no market incentive right now for any of these buildings to lower their rent, and they have every incentive to keep them vacant. And in fact, there are examples of this not only downtown, but in neighborhoods. I heard specifically from the St. John's Boosters that they're trying to get access to one of the vacant storefronts across from that little plaza there. And the landlord very clearly said, I don't want to deal with a tenant, and I like the tax write-off I get for keeping this space vacant. It is crazy. And I think that we should find reasons for these property owners to not be able to benefit from allowing our public squares to rot away. My friend who is with the St. John's Boosters pointed out that there are 20 vacant storefronts in St. John's right now.
Yeah, for years. Yeah.
My drive from Park Rose to downtown to City Hall, I pass over 40 vacant storefronts, some of them that have never, ever been built. These newer buildings that have retail space on the ground floor and then, 3 or 4 levels of apartments. A lot of those landlords never intended to actually lease those spaces out. They use it as a tax write-off, and they allow our cities to just look like garbage because of it.
Yeah.
That should be slightly more expensive.
Yeah. And I think you hit it. It's because a lot of these are, held by these investment firms, and they usually don't even live here in Portland. And that's also something when I think about, with vacancy taxes, I also think about that in particular, because I'm just like, that's the root of it when we come down to it, is that these properties are being sold off, and it's not like the city can really go in there and be like, you can't sell your property. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, that is a big issue. So you were talking about vacancy rates. A recent report from Multifamily Northwest says the vacancy rate in the Portland metro area actually dropped from 6.17% in the spring of 2024 to 5.91 this spring. But this doesn't really capture the full scope, right? Because they're looking at properties that are on the market.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
So of the properties on the market, that vacancy rate has dropped. But can you break that down a little further? Like why that's not our true vacancy rate?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the number of properties that you could go on to Zillow or Craigslist right now and find a rental. But it does not include Airbnbs. It does not include units that have dropped off of the market. It doesn't include a lot of these single family homes that are sitting empty. It doesn't include bank-owned properties. It does not include anything that could not be rented today. And we know that there are thousands and thousands of units in the city that are simply off the market completely. You couldn't find them if you Googled them. The owners are simply disinterested in ever leasing those properties out. So it's an absolutely incomplete picture. We don't have a complete picture of what those look like right now, partially because the city does a really historically bad job of collecting a lot of this data. We do have a landlord registry now, and we have a per door fee for every landlord for every unit that they own. But really, it's more of a sort of checkbox issue. But we do have some of the infrastructure to be able to track down where these units are. And my first step right now is to expand that landlord registry. I think that if we don't have an ability to actually know what full universe of our potential apartments and housing units are, then we can't really begin to talk about solutions to those vacancies.
Right. You're basically saying if there's no data, we don't have a starting point, we don't know what we need, that kind of thing. Because at this point, we don't have numbers.
Right. We have a rough idea of the total number simply because of that landlord registry. We don't have a lot of staff to go verify. And we don't currently have a lot of definitions about what is considered vacant. And so there's a bit of homework that the city needs to do before we actually implement any kind of vacancy fee. We can do it. Other cities have done it.
Yeah.
Many cities have done it. Bigger cities than us have done it. And they've seen their vacancy rates go down. I think that we need to start thinking about this now. And I am working actively with at least 3 other city councilors on this exact problem. We don't have a proposal yet. And honestly, part of the reason I'm coming on the show now is because I want to hear from folks in the community about what they think the specific challenges we're trying to solve are. If there are property owners listening to this who want to tell me why this is the wrong reason and how we get to the same outcomes. I'm very open to what this looks like because there isn't a standard model that works for everywhere. We also have learned that one of the challenges to a vacancy tax in other cities is that the local jurisdictions want to use that money that they collect to do something. They want to use it to build affordable housing. They want to use it to do storefront improvement, things like that. I'm convinced that that is actually the wrong model. I think that a successful vacancy tax earns $0.
So what would you do with the money then if you're not going to collect it?
You know, it will treat it like one-time dollars and put it towards...
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying you're not going to use it as a funding source.
Yeah.
You're not going to fold it into the budget, the yearly budget. That's
exactly.
What you mean. Okay.
Yeah. There's always like a pothole to be filled or a park bench to repair.
Yeah, totally.
I just don't want to come to rely on it. In fact, I was involved with the tax on vapes that happened back in 2020, I think it was. And the whole point of that was to be a diminishing tax, that eventually it collects $0 because nobody is smoking. I want the same thing to happen for this. Unfortunately, we're seeing at the state level, they did come to rely on those dollars and makes it harder for vapes to go away. I want to be very intentional about that up front and come up with the right model that works for Portland.
This is a tax that we rely on. Then now an infrastructure has been built to keep that tax going.
Exactly.
And so there's no incentive for that tax to go away. And I just want people to kind of make that connection if they haven't. Okay, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we return, how vacancy taxes are working in other cities. Are you ready to vote in the May 20th special election? You'll be deciding on bonds to improve safety and update facilities at Portland Public Schools and Mount Hood Community College. You'll also be choosing directors to serve on local school boards, fire and water district boards, and the Urban Flood and Water Safety Board. And as we all know, who heads these boards is important. But if you're still deciding, the League of Women Voters is an excellent resource. Visit vote411.org and lwvpdx.org, where they have ballot measure explanations, candidate info, video interviews, and for the most contested races, there are actually recordings in which candidates or advocates debate the issues. Your vote is your voice. Make it count. Visit vote411.org and LWVPDX to inform your vote.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new next-gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city. This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start the journey today with Babbel? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique. It quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. There are more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Ploth, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel and brushing up a teeny bit on my French. But there's also Turkish, Swedish, Dutch, German, many more languages. Babbel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable and accessible. It's like having a private tutor in your pocket. I particularly love Babbel's guided conversations, which let me practice real-world conversations. What to say at the doctor's office, how to leave a party, using speech recognition to make sure I'm getting the pronunciation right. Babbel's mobile app and website have real-time feedback, progress trackers, and clear visualizations. They're helping me improve my Spanish in only 10 minutes a day. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I know you spoke about working on this tax proposal with a couple other counselors and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. But before we jump into that, I wondered if we could discuss just what the vacancy tax looks like in other cities and were they successful?
Yeah, each jurisdiction is trying to solve a different problem. And so defining what our problem that we're trying to solve up front is really important. In Vancouver, BC, they were having a problem with speculative investors buying up units and just sitting on them. They were building lots of beautiful buildings and they were just sitting empty for years at a time. They wanted to also cut down on the number of vacation homes. Their local vacancy tax has been very successful in reducing that and getting some of those put back onto the market. In San Francisco and Oakland, they focused not only on apartment units, but also on commercial spaces. And they have seen some modest improvements there as well. Commercial spaces are harder, not only because of the financing that we talked about, but also access to capital right now is really hard. If you're a small business who wants to turn that vacant storefront into a coffee shop, small business loans are pretty expensive right now. And getting access to the kind of capital you need to renovate that is proving challenging for a lot of these small businesses. And honestly, the retail market has changed. People really aren't investing in walk-up retail the way they did 10, 20 years ago. I mean, the Amazon effect is real. And so I think we need to be having a bigger conversation in this community about the future of retail and how do we use these spaces that are already there to activate them, as assets for the community. Because I just don't think that we're going to have the same kind of mom and pop boutiques that we used to. So really need to be intentional about that and think about, I don't want this to be a tax write-off for the business owner, but I also don't want to just try and enforce an old business model that simply doesn't exist anymore and force these buildings into foreclosure or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I know that you're creating these parameters of like, okay, what's the problem it's going to solve? Who is it going to affect? How much it's going to be? All that. Has anyone or anything come out already and they're just like, stop, do not do this, just already opposed to even thinking about it?
I have not heard much opposition yet. I have been hearing over and over again at community forums that the need for some way to activate these spaces and get more apartments online, take care of this vacant space, and deal with retail and commercial and office spaces. That is every single town forum I go to, every single town hall, every single public speaking event. Somebody says, what are we going to do about this? How do we solve this crisis? So I have not landed on any specific proposal yet, other than we know that we need to do something. I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. So I'm going to be starting to reach out to some of those cities that have a successful vacancy tax in place and ask, how did you decide that rate? How did you decide who this applies to? And how is implementation going? What can we learn from your success and your failures to bring here to Portland? Because Portland has a long history of reinventing the wheel, and I just desperately don't want to do that and end up in the situation honestly, like the arts tax.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Everyone loves art. Yeah. Everyone loves kids. The arts tax is annoying.
Well, it's also a flat rate, which...
Right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, let's look into what you have discussed so far. Because, this tax that you're proposing, you've been working with counselors Candace Avalos and Samir Kanal and Tiffany Koyama Lane. So are you guys seeing any obvious opportunities? Like you're just like, okay, here's a starting point.
Well, the first thing we need to do is get a real sense of what the scale and scope of the problem we're solving is. We need to understand, first of all, take an inventory of how much vacant land is actually out there. I think we have that, but I don't think we've actually written it down and put it into a single Excel spreadsheet. We need to get a better system to administer and understand the number of apartments, and I think we can do that sooner. I think we can expand our landlord registry to be a little bit more robust and give us some more detail. And then I think we also need to figure out what the scale of the amount of vacant retail space is. So I want to spend some time over the next year or so really taking inventory, building out those systems and getting ourselves ready for whatever that final proposal might be. And then I want to work with the community to figure out how big do we go on this? How hard do we go? And are we actually going to be able to solve it? Because I am very aware of the macro images of Portland and trying to attract investment and trying to get new apartments built. It is a challenge right now, and I don't want to accidentally do something that ends up screwing us up later in the process. So I want to get this right. I want to find the right size, and I want to make sure that it actually solves the problem. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is we're talking about those big wealth funds that are the ones that usually finance these buildings. They're not investing in building new buildings right now. They're investing in buying the foreclosed buildings in Portland.
Yeah, that's creepy if you think about it, because they're just basically trying to hoard the monopoly board. And we're already seeing what they do with the properties. It's becoming like a tax haven almost.
Absolutely. It is a compounding problem. I know that there are good building owners out there who want to do well. They want to provide for their community, and that there are challenges to that. I want to understand what are the actual obstacles. I mean, the city is not going to be subsidizing, downtown retail space so we can put a dance troupe in there instead. But we got to find the building owners who want their spaces to be vibrant, who understand that they are a contributor to the community, that they are shooting themselves in the foot again by keeping these spaces vacant and allowing them to deteriorate. They are creating worsening business conditions for themselves. I also think that there may be an opportunity here to convert some of these retail spaces into apartments. One nice thing about a lot of the sort of ground floor retail is that a lot of times they don't have steps. And we have heard from folks like older adults who are looking for no-step walk-up apartments. Maybe we could convert some of these vacant storefronts into apartments for seniors. Maybe we could do something else other than allowing them to sit there empty for years at a time. we just have to reclaim the public square. We have to find the people who are willing to play ball and be part of Portland. And we have to hold the ones who are unwilling to be neighborly and hold them accountable and make it more expensive for them to just sit there and watch as the city rots.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like dance troops just caught a stray there, but...
Well, we know that dance troops can't pay, the same price that Nike.
I don't know. I'm not saying I'm in a dance troupe. I'm just saying they caught a stray. That's all I'm going to say.
That's fair.
Okay,
that's fair.
So I do want to say, though, that even once we get this whole vacancy tax going, which, by the way, like, how soon do you think a city could adopt a tax like this?
I'm trying to go intentionally, not quickly. My goal is to try and have this conversation moving forward in the next year.
So, like, if that were to happen, we were all of a sudden, every storefront were activated. We've discussed in this conversation that one of the main issues of this problem are those investment companies coming in and buying cheap property and then just sort of sitting on it. Like, how is that going to be avoided? Because you can't really tell people you can't buy this or whatever. How would the city set up these safeguards that would disincentivize, outside interest coming in and kind of just sucking the soul out of Portland?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's undeniable that enormous multinational, I don't know what to even call it, but literally money coming from primarily Asia has been coming into the United States and spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy these buildings to just park their investment because they got to put their millions somewhere. We have to influence that calculus, is my opinion. That they are sitting down and choosing where to invest those dollars based off of formulas and Excel spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to influence that in some capacity to not encourage investment like that. But also, I think that the city needs to be thinking about how we are using our public dollars in more intentional ways. The city council recently passed a resolution exploring social housing, meaning that the city itself would actually pay for and build it ourselves and continue to own it. There's a proposal around a public bank, which I am a big supporter of, and using public dollars as an investment tool to try and activate and own and build those spaces out. Mm-hmm. There are examples in other communities, and there are other communities where they just didn't bother. They just said, this is just what it is. And, Utah has had a vacancy tax on the books for decades, apparently.
They were like one of the first in the United States, which is kind of interesting because when you think of Utah, you're not like, oh, the very, socialist progressive,
right. Right.
Yeah, spearheading the state of Utah. Yeah.
Right. They are still open for business and no one is accusing them of being crazy liberals ruining the business sector. This seems like a reasonable proposal. It's not just a Bay Area style proposal.
Yeah.
Which, we don't want Portland to turn into San Francisco.
Which was recent, by the way. They recently, they were just looking around. They're like, what can we do? Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. Something has to be done. And there's no perfect model. Utah, their business climate is very different than Portland's. Vancouver, BC, it's not fair to compare Canada to the United States. And whatever the hell the Bay Area is doing, we don't want Portland to become that. So that is specifically why I'm having this conversation early. I want to find a Portland-sized solution to this problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, Counselor Jamie Dunphy, thank you so much for taking the time for talking through this. I know there's a lot more to unpack here, and thank you for doing you and the other counselors, thank you for doing this heavy lifting, because this is a thing that people have been talking about for years now. So I'm glad it's finally getting looked into. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to see what happens.
Well, thank you for beating the drum. Thank you for being one of the more vocal proponents of this and inspiring the city council to look at this. I've heard it from every town hall, but this show has absolutely also been helping us realize how important this issue is. And I hope that if listeners are hearing this and they are horrified by what I'm saying, they reach out and they tell me what I should be doing instead. And if they like what I'm proposing, or they have a good example of a terrifying way that a landlord is abusing this system, I would love to hear about that as well. I'm really not wedded to any particular process. I'm wedded to an outcome. And I just want to see Portland succeed. So thank you all for keeping the fight alive.
Of course. Thank you. It's our pleasure. And before we head out, I just quickly wanted to shout out and celebrate our newest CityCast Portland neighbors. A big thank you to Angela R., Kieran C., Anna B., Marcel F., Eileen or Aileen C., I hope I got one of those right, Megan K., Andy V., Ashley T., Jody F., and Jamie D. And now for some events happening this week. Every Thursday on the show, we like to bring you a few recommendations to help you plan your weekend. And here's what we got. This Friday, the 10th annual Mosaic Vanport Festival is kicking off. Going through June 1st, there's theater, workshops, guided tours, performances, kids' activities. The programming is such that there's pretty much something for everyone. I, for one, will be checking out the Black Panther Legacy Tour on Sunday. That seems pretty cool. Also kicking off this Friday is the 22nd annual Filmed by Bike Festival, which is such a uniquely Portland event. Every year, they curate the world's best bike-focused short films at the Hollywood Theater. There's also bike clinics, group rides, and workshops. So if you're into bikes and films, you got to go check that out. And if you've ever wanted a gentle introduction into the inclusive sport of disc golf, this Sunday at 11 a.m., Milo McIver State Park Campground is hosting a 27-hole intro course. All you need to bring are some walking shoes, water, and sun protection. They're providing the rest. And this is just scratching the surface of all the things happening this weekend in Portland. For even more local events and news, sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Portland, or visit portland.citycast.fm/events. A link to the details of everything I mentioned is in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend, rate or leave us a review. It really does help us out. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.